The dust cloud rose so high and so fast that Victoria Fenton saw it before she heard the thunder of hooves. And by then, it was already too late to do anything but freeze in the middle of the dirt road cutting through Ogden, Utah territory. The horse came barreling around the corner of the general store like a demon out of hell itself, wild-eyed and frothing, its reins dangling uselessly as it charged straight toward her with the kind of speed that promised broken bones or worse. Victoria's packages flew from her arms, fabric and thread scattering across the ground as she stumbled backward, her boots catching in the hem of her skirt. She was going down, and that horse was going to trample her right there in the September heat of 1876, and there was not a single thing she could do about it. Then, suddenly, there were arms around her waist, strong and sure, yanking her sideways with such force that her hat flew off her head. She crashed into something solid and warm that smelled like leather and sage and horse, and they tumbled together into the narrow space between two buildings just as the runaway horse thundered, passed so close, she felt the wind of its passing against her face. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She could not catch her breath. The world spun in dizzying circles until she realized she was pressed against a man's chest, his arms still wrapped protectively around her, his own breathing coming fast and hard against her hair. "You all right, miss?" The voice was deep and rough, tinged with concern and something else she could not quite identify. Victoria pushed back slightly, looking up into a face she had never seen before in Ogden's limited social circles. He was young, perhaps 25 to her 22 years, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds over the Wasatch Mountains. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a dangerous look that his gentle grip contradicted entirely. He was studying her face with such intensity that she felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the shock still coursing through her system. "I think so," she managed, her voice shaking more than she would have liked. "That horse would have killed me." "Probably," he agreed, but there was no satisfaction in his tone, only a grim acknowledgement of what they both knew to be true. He released her carefully, as if worried she might fall, his hands hovering near her arms until she steadied herself against the wooden wall of the building. "Can you stand?" "Yes." Victoria smoothed down her skirts with trembling hands, trying to gather what remained of her dignity along with the composure that had scattered as surely as her packages. "Thank you. I do not know what I would have done if you had not been there." "Died, most likely," he said bluntly, and she looked at him sharply, unsure if he was being deliberately harsh or simply honest. His expression suggested the latter. He stepped back out into the street, checking both directions before offering her his hand. "Let me help you get your things." They gathered up the scattered parcels together, and Victoria noticed how efficiently he moved, how his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings as if looking for the next threat. His hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of someone who worked hard and lived harder. When they had collected everything, he carried the packages for her without asking, falling into step beside her as naturally as if they had known each other for years, instead of minutes. "I am Victoria Fenton," she said, deciding that propriety could wait when someone had just saved your life. "My father owns the lumber mill on the edge of town. Nathan Sterling." He did not elaborate, and Victoria found herself curious about this quiet stranger who had appeared out of nowhere to rescue her. He did not have the look of the settled men in Ogden, the farmers and shopkeepers and miners who had put down roots in the growing territory. There was something restless about him, something untamed that reminded her of the mountains themselves. "Are you new to Ogden, Mr. Sterling?" "Just passing through," he said, confirming her suspicions. "Came up from Colorado heading to Montana, Thought I would rest the horses for a few days, pick up some supplies." He glanced down at her, and she thought she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Did not expect to be tackling women in alleyways. Despite herself, Victoria laughed, and some of the tension drained from her shoulders. "I suppose it is not a typical afternoon activity for most travelers." She paused at the corner where the street split, one direction leading toward the more prosperous part of town where her father's house sat proud and white-painted, the other toward the collection of boarding houses and saloons that served the transient population. "Where are you staying, Mrs. Henderson's place?" Nathan shifted the packages slightly, and Victoria noticed the careful way he held them, as if afraid of damaging her purchases. She had a room available and the price was fair. "She runs a respectable establishment," Victoria said, knowing it to be true. Mrs. Henderson was particular about her boarders, refusing to house the rowdier elements that sometimes drifted through Ogden on their way to somewhere else. That he had secured a room there spoke well of his character, or at least of his ability to present himself properly. "Will you walk with me a bit further? My father would want to thank you properly for what you did." Something shifted in Nathan's expression, a closing off that happened so quickly Victoria almost missed it. "That is not necessary. Any man would have done the same." "But you are the man who did it," she pointed out, studying him more closely. There it was again, that wall coming up, that distance he was trying to place between them even as he continued walking beside her. "My father is a generous man, Mr. Sterling. He would consider himself in your debt." "I do not want to be in debt to anyone, and I do not want anyone in debt to me." The words came out harder than perhaps he had intended because he softened them immediately. "I appreciate the offer, Miss Fenton, but I did what needed doing. No payment required or desired." They had reached the white fence that surrounded her father's property, and Victoria stopped, turning to face him fully. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and jaw. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way that was entirely different from the polished gentleman who sometimes came calling at her father's invitation. Businessmen from Salt Lake City or Sacramento who saw in Victoria Fenton a suitable wife, and in her father's lumber operation a suitable investment. Those men left her cold. This one, with his scarred hands and guarded eyes, made something warm unfurl in her chest that she could not quite name. "At least let me return the favor of your kindness," she said. "Come to dinner tomorrow evening. It is just my father and me, and we always have more than enough food. Please." Nathan looked like he wanted to refuse. She could see the refusal forming on his lips, the automatic rejection of anything that might tie him to this place, or these people for longer than absolutely necessary. But then his eyes met hers, really met them, and whatever he saw there made him hesitate. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable exactly, but charged with something Victoria had never felt before, an awareness that made her skin tingle and her breath catch. "All right," he said finally, the words seeming to surprise him as much as they pleased her. "Tomorrow evening. What time?" 6 o'clock. Victoria took her packages from him, their fingers brushing in the transfer, and she felt that strange electricity again, shooting up her arm like lightning. "Thank you again, Mr. Sterling, for everything, Nathan," he said. "If we are having dinner together, you should call me Nathan. Then you should call me Victoria." She smiled at him, and for just a moment his guarded expression softened into something almost like warmth. Then he touched the brim of his hat, turned and walked away, his long stride carrying him back toward the center of town. Victoria stood at her gate watching him go, her heart still beating too fast, though now she suspected it had nothing to do with the runaway horse and everything to do with the man who had saved her from it. The house smelled like roasting chicken and fresh bread when Victoria entered, and she could hear Consuela singing in the kitchen as she prepared dinner. Consuela had been with the Fenton family since Victoria's mother died 8 years ago, a Mexican woman of indeterminate age who ran the household with efficiency and warmth in equal measure. Victoria's father would be at the mill until sunset as usual, so she had time to change out of her dusty dress and compose herself before telling him about the afternoon's events. She was in her room, carefully hanging up her good dress, when Consuela appeared in the doorway with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You look different. What happened in town?" "A horse almost trampled me," Victoria said, deciding that honesty was the best approach with Consuela, who had an uncanny ability to detect lies. "A man pulled me out of the way just in time." Consuela's eyes widened and she crossed herself quickly. "Madre de Dios, you could have been killed." "I know." Victoria sat down on her bed, suddenly feeling the delayed shock of how close she had come to disaster. "If he had not been there, if he had not moved so quickly, I would be dead right now, Consuela. Gone, just like that." The older woman sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "But you are not dead. You are here, safe. Who was this man?" "His name is Nathan Sterling. He is staying at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, just passing through town." Victoria leaned into Consuela's comfortable warmth. "I invited him to dinner tomorrow. I hope Father will not mind." "Mind? He will want to give this man a medal." Consuela squeezed her shoulder gently. "What is he like, this Nathan Sterling?" Victoria considered the question carefully. "Guarded. Lonely, I think, though he would probably deny it. There is something sad about him, something he is carrying that weighs heavy." She thought of the way his eyes had swept the street, always watching, always ready. "He has been hurt, I suspect, and he does not want to be hurt again." "Ah," Consuela said softly, and there was understanding in that single syllable. "And you, my Hija, what do you feel about this man?" "I barely know him," Victoria protested, but she could feel her cheeks heating again. "We spoke for perhaps 15 minutes. Sometimes 15 minutes is enough." Consuela stood, smoothing down her apron. "Sometimes you know in 15 seconds. The heart does not need time the way the mind does. It knows what it knows." Victoria wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat because part of her wondered if Consuela was right. She had felt something the moment Nathan's arms closed around her, something more than just relief at being saved. There had been a rightness to it, a sense of fitting together that defied logic and sense. She was being foolish, she told herself firmly. He was a drifter, a man passing through on his way to somewhere else, and she was letting her imagination run wild simply because he had kind eyes and strong arms. Her father came home just as the sun was setting, filling the house with his usual energy and noise. Thomas Fenton was a big man with a big voice and an even bigger heart, and Victoria loved him fiercely despite his tendency to be overprotective. When she told him about the runaway horse, he went pale, then red, then pulled her into a crushing hug that lifted her feet off the ground. "My God, Victoria, my God." His voice shook, and she realized with a start that there were tears in his eyes. "If something had happened to you, if I had lost you too, I would not have survived it. But nothing did happen, Father. Nathan saved me. I am perfectly fine." She hugged him back just as tightly, feeling the fear radiating off him in waves. Her mother's death had broken something in Thomas Fenton, and Victoria knew he lived in constant terror of losing his daughter as well. "I invited him to dinner tomorrow so you could thank him properly." Thomas pulled back, wiping at his eyes unself-consciously. "Good, good, I want to meet this man, shake his hand. What else can we do for him? Does he need work, money? I can offer him a position at the mill." I do not think he wants payment, Victoria said carefully. He seemed uncomfortable with the idea of being thanked at all. Pride, her father said, nodding as if this explained everything. A man's pride is important. We will thank him, feed him well, and let him know he has friends in Ogden should he ever need them. That is what we can do. The next day dragged by with agonizing slowness. Victoria tried to keep herself busy, helping Consuela prepare the meal, tending to her small garden, reading the newspaper that had come up from Salt Lake City. But her mind kept drifting to the evening ahead, to Nathan Sterling and his stormy eyes, and the way he had held her like she was something precious. She changed her dress 3 times before settling on the blue one that Consuela said brought out the color of her eyes, then felt ridiculous for caring so much about her appearance. Nathan arrived exactly at 6 o'clock, dressed in clean clothes that were simple but well made, his dark hair still damp as if he had just bathed. He carried a bottle of whiskey that he presented to Thomas with a directness Victoria was coming to recognize as characteristic. "For your hospitality," he said simply. Thomas accepted it with grave courtesy, then shocked Victoria by pulling Nathan into a brief, hard embrace. "You saved my daughter's life. There are no words sufficient to express my gratitude, but I will try to do so anyway over dinner." Something in Nathan's carefully controlled expression cracked just slightly, revealing a vulnerability that made Victoria's heart ache. For just a moment, he looked almost lost, as if simple human kindness was so foreign to him that he did not know how to accept it. Then he recovered, nodding stiffly. "She was in danger, I helped. Any decent man would have done the same." "But many would not have," Thomas said seriously. "Many would have hesitated or not noticed or decided it was not their concern. You acted and my daughter lives because of it. That means something to me, son. That means everything." Dinner was a lively affair despite Nathan's initial quietness. Thomas Fenton could talk enough for 3 men when he was in good spirits, and he was clearly determined to put their guest at ease. He told stories about the early days of the lumber mill, about the challenges of building a business in territory that was still finding its feet, about the characters and scoundrels he had known over the years. Victoria watched Nathan slowly relax under the onslaught of her father's good humor, the tight line of his shoulders easing, the wariness in his eyes giving way to something that might almost be enjoyment. "So you are heading to Montana," Thomas said, passing Nathan the platter of roasted potatoes. "What is drawing you north?" "Work," Nathan said. "I heard there are ranches up there looking for experienced hands. I have been working cattle most of my life, and I am good at it." "Why not stay here?" Thomas leaned forward, his business mind clearly engaged. "Utah territory is growing fast. There is work aplenty for a skilled man, and Ogden is positioned to become a major city with the railroad coming through. A man could build a good life here." Nathan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I do not stay places long. I prefer to keep moving." Running from something or running to something? The question was asked gently, but Victoria saw Nathan flinch as if struck. "Father," she said softly, and Thomas had the grace to look abashed. "Forgive an old man's curiosity. I have made it my business to understand people, and I see in you someone who has known hardship." Thomas refilled Nathan's glass with the whiskey he had brought. "I do not mean to pry into what is not my concern." "There is nothing to run from," Nathan said, but his voice had gone flat and distant. "I simply prefer not to put down roots. The world is big, and I intend to see as much of it as I can." It was a lie, or at least not the whole truth, and Victoria could see that her father recognized it as well, but Thomas was too wise to push further. Instead, he pivoted the conversation to safer topics, asking Nathan's opinion on various matters related to horses and cattle, drawing him out with the same skill he used in business negotiations. By the time Consuela brought out apple pie for dessert, Nathan was talking more freely, even laughing at one of Thomas's more outrageous stories about a poker game gone wrong. After dinner, Thomas excused himself to his study to review some paperwork, leaving Victoria and Nathan alone on the front porch as the evening settled into dusk. The air was cooling rapidly the way it did in the mountains, and Victoria wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. Nathan stood at the porch railing looking out at the darkening street, his profile sharp against the last of the light. "Your father is a good man," he said quietly. "He is," Victoria agreed, moving to stand beside him. "He can be overwhelming sometimes, but his heart is in the right place. He has been protective of me since my mother died. I am all he has left." "What happened to her?" Nathan glanced at her, and she was surprised by the genuine interest in his eyes. "Cholera. 8 years ago when I was 14. There was an outbreak in Ogden, and she was helping care for the sick. She caught it and was gone within days." Victoria swallowed against the old grief. Father wanted to blame someone, wanted to rage at God or fate or the world, but there was no one to blame. It just was. Bad water, bad luck, bad timing. "I am sorry." Nathan's voice was rough with an empathy that came from personal experience, she thought. It is hard to lose someone that way, hard to make sense of it. "Did you lose someone?" She asked the question carefully, ready to retreat if he pulled back behind his walls again. For a long moment she thought he would not answer. Then he said very quietly, "My whole family, fire. I was 17, working a drive up in Wyoming. By the time I got back to our ranch in Colorado, there was nothing left but ashes and graves." His hands tightened on the porch railing until his knuckles went white. "My parents, my 2 younger sisters, my brother, all gone in one night." "Oh, Nathan." Victoria's hand covered his before she could stop herself, and she felt him tremble beneath her touch. "I am so sorry. I cannot imagine that kind of loss. I could not stay there after," he continued as if her words had opened a floodgate he could not close. "Could not bear to be in that place without them, could not stand the pity in people's eyes when they looked at me. So I left, started drifting. That was 8 years ago, and I have not stopped moving since. 8 years. The same amount of time since Victoria had lost her mother. They had both been shaped by grief, she realized, but in different ways. She had stayed and built a life within the confines of her loss, while he had run and kept running, never letting himself stop long enough to feel the full weight of what he carried. "You ever think about stopping?" she asked. "About finding a place to stay?" "No." The word was immediate and absolute. "Staying means caring. Caring means losing. I will not go through that again." "So you will just keep running forever, keep everyone at arm's length so you never have to risk being hurt again." Victoria felt a flash of frustration at the sheer stubbornness of his self-imposed isolation. "That is not living, Nathan. That is just surviving." He pulled his hand away from hers, and she immediately missed the warmth of the contact. "Surviving is enough for me." "Is it really?" She turned to face him fully, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Are you truly content to wander from place to place, never forming attachments, never letting anyone close enough to matter? Is that what you want for the rest of your life?" "It is what is safe," he said, and the honesty in his voice broke her heart a little. "I know how to do this, Victoria. I know how to keep moving, how to work hard and earn my keep, and then move on before things get complicated. I do not know how to do anything else anymore." "You could learn," she said softly, "if you wanted to." Nathan looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw such longing in his eyes that it took her breath away. For just a moment, she thought he might reach for her, might close the small distance between them and let himself feel whatever this thing was that had sprung up so quickly between them. But then he stepped back, shaking his head. "I should go. Thank you for dinner, and please thank your father again." He moved toward the porch steps with the quick efficiency of someone retreating from danger. "I will likely be leaving in a few days. I wish you well, Victoria Fenton." "Nathan, wait." She caught his arm, feeling the muscle tense beneath her fingers. "Will I see you again before you leave?" "It would be better if you did not," he said, but he did not pull away from her touch. "I am not the kind of man you should involve yourself with, Victoria. I have nothing to offer anyone." "I am not asking you to offer me anything," she said, though part of her whispered that it was not entirely true. "I am simply asking if I will see you again." He looked at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. "Probably," he admitted. "Ogden is not that big a town." "But Victoria, please do not read more into this than there is. I saved you from a horse. We had dinner. That is all this is, all it can be, if you say so." She released his arm, stepping back. "Good night, Nathan Sterling. Good night, Victoria." She watched him walk away into the darkness, his figure disappearing into the shadows between street lamps. Only when he was completely out of sight did she allow herself to acknowledge the truth Consuela had spoken. Her heart knew what it knew, and what it knew was that Nathan Sterling was already more than just the man who had saved her from a runaway horse. He was becoming someone who mattered, someone she wanted to know more deeply, someone whose pain she wanted to ease even though she barely understood it. The problem was that Nathan was determined not to let her matter to him in return. He had built walls around his heart higher and stronger than any fortress, and he had no intention of letting anyone breach them. Victoria understood the impulse. She herself had been careful with her own heart since her mother's death, wary of letting people too close. But there was a difference between being careful and being closed off entirely. Nathan had shut himself down so completely that he had forgotten how to live, and she found herself wanting desperately to remind him. Over the next several days, Victoria did indeed see Nathan around town, though he seemed to be doing his best to avoid her specifically. She would catch glimpses of him at the general store, at the livery, once outside the land office deep in conversation with a surveyor. Each time, he would notice her and give a polite nod, but he never approached, never gave her more than that bare acknowledgement. It drove her to distraction. "You are pining," Consuela said on the fourth day, catching Victoria staring out the window toward town instead of focusing on the mending in her lap. "It is very obvious." "I am not pining," Victoria protested. "I am simply concerned. He seems lonely." "Ah yes, concern. That is what we are calling it now." Consuela's voice was rich with amusement. "My Hija, I have seen this look before. You care for this man." "How can I care for someone I barely know?" But even as she said it, Victoria knew it was a weak argument. She did care, more than made sense, more than was wise. "The heart does not require lengthy acquaintance to recognize its match," Consuela said, echoing her earlier wisdom. "But this one, he is afraid. You will have to be brave for both of you. What if he leaves before I can convince him to stay?" The fear had been growing in Victoria's chest for days now. Nathan had said he would be moving on soon, and she believed him. He was already preparing to run, probably terrified by whatever he had felt between them on her porch that night. "Then you will have to give him a reason to stay that is stronger than his fear." Consuela patted her hand. "But be careful, Victoria. A man who runs from his heart can be caught, but only if he wants to be. You cannot force him to face what he is not ready to face." That afternoon, Victoria decided she was tired of waiting for Nathan to come to her. If he was determined to avoid her, she would simply have to stop allowing it. She put on her riding habit, saddled her mare Dolly, and rode into town with a purpose. She found Nathan exactly where she had expected to, at the livery stable checking on his horses. "Good afternoon." she said brightly, dismounting before he could make an excuse to leave. "I was hoping I might run into you." Nathan straightened from examining his gelding's hoof, and she saw resignation and something else flicker across his face. "Miss Fenton, I thought we had agreed you would call me Victoria." She led Dolly into the stable, very deliberately invading his space. "Are your horses well?" "They are fine." He watched her approach with the wariness of a wild animal scenting a trap. "Is there something you needed?" "Actually, yes. I was wondering if you might do me a favor." She had rehearsed this on the ride into town, and now she delivered it with as much innocent sincerity as she could muster. "My father has been talking about purchasing some additional acreage for grazing, but he wants an experienced opinion on the quality of the land and what it could support. You know cattle. Would you be willing to ride out and take a look with me?" It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it, but Nathan was too polite to call her on it directly. She could see him searching for a reason to refuse, his jaw working as he tried to find words that would not be outright rude. "I am sure your father has people he trusts for that kind of assessment," he said finally. "He does, but none of them are here at the moment. The foreman is in Salt Lake City buying equipment and will not be back for several days. Father mentioned it at breakfast this morning, and I thought of you immediately." She smiled at him with all the charm she possessed. "Please, Nathan. It would help my father tremendously, and the land is beautiful. It would be a pleasant afternoon ride at the very least." She could see the exact moment he gave in, the way his shoulders dropped slightly in defeat. "All right. When did you want to go?" "Now, if you are available." "The weather is perfect, and I have nothing pressing this afternoon." She was already leading Dolly back outside, not giving him time to reconsider. "We can pack a light meal, make an afternoon of it." Nathan muttered something under his breath that might have been a prayer for patience or a curse, but he saddled his gelding without further argument. 20 minutes later, they were riding out of Ogden toward the foothills, a small pack of food and water tied to Nathan's saddle. The day was indeed perfect, the sky a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds, the temperature warm but not oppressive. Wildflowers still bloomed in patches along the trail, and birds sang from the scrub brush. For the first mile they rode in silence, but it was not uncomfortable. Victoria was acutely aware of Nathan beside her, the easy way he sat his horse, the competence in every movement. He was completely at home on horseback in a way that spoke of thousands of hours in the saddle. Finally, she decided that silence had gone on long enough. "Tell me about your family," she said. "What were they like before the fire?" Nathan's hands tightened on the reins, but when he spoke, his voice was steady. "Why do you want to know?" "Because you love them, and they are part of who you are. Because talking about the people we have lost helps keep them alive in some way." She glanced at him, trying to read his expression. "And because I want to understand you better." "Why?" The question was direct and challenging. "Why do you want to understand me, Victoria?" "I told you, I am leaving soon. There is no point in this." "Maybe I disagree about the point." She kept her voice calm, though her heart was racing. "Maybe I think that human connection has value even if it is temporary. Maybe I think you need a friend, and I am volunteering for the position." "A friend," Nathan repeated, and there was something almost bitter in his tone. "Is that what you want to be? Among other things, perhaps." The admission surprised her as much as it clearly surprised him, but friendship would be a start. Nathan was quiet for so long that Victoria thought he might not respond at all. Then, slowly, he began to talk. "My father was a rancher, built the place up from nothing. He was hard but fair, expected a lot but gave a lot in return. My mother was softer, always singing, always finding reasons to smile even when things were difficult. My brother Jack was 2 years younger than me, best friend I ever had. We did everything together." His voice caught slightly. My sisters were much younger. Sarah was 7 and Emma was 5 when they died. They used to follow me around like little shadows, asking a million questions about everything. They sound wonderful, Victoria said softly. They were. Nathan's throat worked as he swallowed hard. The fire started in the middle of the night. We never knew how, maybe a knocked-over lantern or a spark from the fireplace. I was not there. I was 200 miles away, sleeping under the stars, completely unaware that my entire world was burning. By the time someone tracked me down to tell me it had been 3 days, they were already buried. Oh, Nathan! Victoria's eyes burned with sympathetic tears. I cannot imagine how that must have felt. Like dying, he said simply. Like wanting to die. For a long time, I wished I had been there, wished I had burned with them rather than living without them. It seemed wrong that I got to survive when they did not. Wrong that I got to keep breathing and moving and existing when they were just gone. But you did keep living. Victoria reached across the space between their horses to touch his arm briefly. You survived, if you can call it that. Nathan shook his head. I have spent 8 years running from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to build a life, never letting anyone close enough to matter. You are right about what you said the other night. This is not living. It is just surviving. But surviving is all I know how to do anymore. They had reached the area Victoria had ostensibly brought him to see, a stretch of rolling grassland that butted up against the mountains. She dismounted, and after a moment, Nathan did the same. They stood together looking out at the view. The valley spread below them with Ogden, a collection of small buildings in the distance. What if you learned how to live again? Victoria asked, turning to face him. What if you stopped running long enough to remember what it feels like to have a home, to have people who care about you? What if I did, and then I lost it all again? Nathan's voice was raw with a fear so deep it was almost palpable. What if I let myself care, let myself feel, and then everything gets taken away just like before? I do not think I could survive that a second time, Victoria. I barely survived it the first time. So you would rather feel nothing. You would rather spend the rest of your life alone and isolated because you are too afraid to risk being hurt. She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. That is not protection, Nathan. That is prison. Maybe, he agreed, but it is a prison I understand, one I control. As long as I do not let anyone in, no one can hurt me. And no one can love you either. The words hung between them, charged with meaning. No one can bring you joy or comfort or companionship. You will go through life completely alone, and for what? Because you are too frightened to take a chance. Yes. His eyes blazed at her. Yes, I am frightened. Is that what you want to hear? I am terrified, Victoria, terrified of caring about someone and losing them. Terrified of putting down roots only to watch them burn. Terrified of you. Of me, her breath caught. Why me? Because you make me want things I cannot have. Nathan's hands came up to grip her shoulders, not roughly but with an intensity that made her shiver. Because when I look at you, I start imagining what it would be like to stay in one place, to build a life, to wake up next to someone every morning and know they will be there the next morning too. And that terrifies me more than anything because I know how easily it can all be taken away. It can, Victoria admitted, her own hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath her palms. You are right about that. There are no guarantees, Nathan. We could both die tomorrow, but that does not mean we should not live today. That does not mean we should deny ourselves connection and love and all the beautiful things that make life worth living just because we are afraid of loss. Easy for you to say. You still have your father, your home, your life intact. You have not lost everything. But even as he said it, she could see the longing in his eyes, the desperate want warring with his fear. "No, but I lost my mother, and it nearly destroyed my father. I have watched him struggle with the fear of losing me too, watched him try to wrap me in cotton wool to keep me safe from a world that cannot be controlled." Victoria's voice was fierce now. "And I understand that fear, Nathan. I truly do. But I also understand that life is short and precious and unpredictable. And the only thing more tragic than losing someone you love is never allowing yourself to love at all." Nathan's hands slid from her shoulders to cup her face, his thumbs brushing along her cheekbones with a tenderness that made her ache. "You do not know what you are asking of me. I am asking you to try. I am asking you to stop running, at least for a little while, and see what happens if you stay." She covered his hands with her own, holding them against her face. "I am asking you to give yourself a chance at happiness, even if it scares you, even if it might hurt. Because the alternative is spending the rest of your life half alive, and you deserve so much more than that." For a long, breathless moment, they stood frozen like that, staring at each other while the wind whispered through the grass around them. Victoria could see the war happening behind Nathan's eyes, fear and hope and longing all tangled together in a knot so tight she did not know if it could ever be undone. Then, slowly, carefully, as if afraid she might disappear if he moved too quickly, Nathan lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost hesitant, the kiss of a man who had forgotten how to be tender and was relearning it in real time. Victoria made a soft sound of encouragement and pressed closer, her arms sliding around his neck as she kissed him back with all the feeling that had been building in her chest since the moment he had pulled her out of the path of that runaway horse. Nathan groaned, his arms coming around her waist to pull her flush against him, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like need and desperation and hope all mixed together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I do not know how to do this," he whispered. "I do not know how to let someone in anymore." "Then we will figure it out together," Victoria whispered back. "One day at a time, one moment at a time. I am not asking you to have all the answers right now, Nathan. I am just asking you not to leave. Not yet. If I stay, I will fall in love with you." He said it like a warning, like a confession, like a promise. "I am already halfway there, and that terrifies me beyond reason." Victoria's heart soared even as tears pricked her eyes. "Then stay anyway, fall anyway. I will catch you, I promise." Nathan pulled back just far enough to look at her properly, his eyes searching her face as if trying to memorize every detail. "You are either very brave or very foolish." "Maybe both," she admitted with a shaky laugh. "But I know what I feel, Nathan, even if it does not make logical sense. I know that I have never felt this way about anyone before. I know that when I thought you were going to leave without giving us a chance, it hurt more than it should for someone I barely know. And I know that you feel it too, even if you are too scared to admit it." "I do," he said simply. "I feel it. I have felt it since the moment I saw you standing in that street, right before you were about to die. My first thought was not about saving you. It was about how beautiful you were and how tragic it would be if such beauty was erased from the world. And then I grabbed you, and you were in my arms, and something inside me recognized you even though we had never met. It was like coming home to a place I had never been." "So stay," Victoria said again, her voice breaking slightly on the words. "Please, Nathan, give us a chance. Give yourself a chance." She could see him wavering, could see the moment when the fear began to lose its grip and hope started to take root. Then he kissed her again, deeper this time, more certain, and when he pulled back there was something like wonder in his eyes. "I will stay," he said. "At least for a while. I cannot promise forever, Victoria. I cannot promise I will not get scared and want to run, but I will try. For you, I will try." It was not everything she wanted, but it was a start, and she would take it. "That is all I ask." They spent the rest of the afternoon on that hillside, talking and kissing and learning each other in the way of new lovers everywhere. Nathan told her more about his family, about the ranch in Colorado and the life he had lost. Victoria told him about her mother, about the grief that still caught her by surprise sometimes even after 8 years, about the loneliness of being the only thing standing between her father and complete despair. They talked about dreams and fears and all the small details that make up a human life. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and orange, Nathan helped Victoria back onto her horse. But before they could start the ride back to town, he caught her hand, his expression serious. "I need you to understand something," he said. "I am not good at this, at relationships and feelings and all the things that normal people seem to do so easily. I will make mistakes. I will probably pull away sometimes when things feel too intense. I might even hurt you without meaning to, just because I am so used to protecting myself that I have forgotten how to be open." "I understand," Victoria said, squeezing his hand. "And you need to understand something too. I am stubborn, and I do not give up easily on things that matter to me. So when you pull away, I will pull you back. When you get scared, I will remind you why you stayed. And when you try to protect yourself by hurting me, I will forgive you, as long as you are genuinely trying." Nathan smiled then, a real smile that transformed his whole face, making him look years younger. "Stubborn, I should have known." "Among my many charms," she agreed lightly. "Come on, we should get back before my father sends out a search party." They rode back to Ogden as the evening settled in around them, their horses walking close enough that their legs occasionally brushed. It felt different now, Victoria thought. The whole world felt different, brighter and more full of possibility. She had awakened something in Nathan that had been dormant for 8 years, some capacity for hope and connection he had thought dead. And he had awakened something in her too, a passion and depth of feeling she had not known herself capable of. When they reached her father's house, Nathan dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist. "May I call on you tomorrow? You may call on me every day if you like," Victoria said, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. "Your father will want to know my intentions." Nathan's expression grew serious. "What should I tell him?" "Tell him the truth, that you care for me and you want the chance to see where this might lead." She touched his cheek gently. "He likes you, Nathan. He will be happy if I am happy." "I want you to be happy," Nathan said softly. "I want to be the one who makes you happy. I just hope I remember how." "You are already doing it," she assured him. "Just by being here, just by trying, that is enough." Thomas Fenton was indeed pleased when Victoria told him that Nathan would be calling on her, though he was also characteristically protective. Over the next several weeks, Nathan became a regular presence at the Fenton house, joining them for dinners, spending evenings on the porch talking with Victoria while her father tactfully gave them space. He also began working at the lumber mill, having accepted Thomas's standing offer of employment. It was not always easy. Nathan had spent 8 years building walls around his heart, and they did not come down overnight. There were days when Victoria could see him struggling, could see the fear rising up and making him want to bolt. On those days, she would simply be there, patient and steady, reminding him without words that she was not going anywhere. Slowly, gradually, those moments of panic came less frequently. 3 months after they met, on a crisp December evening with snow beginning to fall, Nathan asked Victoria to marry him. They were in her father's parlor, sitting close together on the sofa while Thomas dozed in his chair by the fire. Nathan's hands were shaking as he pulled a simple gold ring from his pocket. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "One of the only things that survived the fire. I have been carrying it with me for 8 years, and I never thought I would have a reason to give it to anyone." He looked at her with such naked emotion that it took her breath away. "I love you, Victoria. I do not say it enough, and I am probably not good enough at showing it, but I do. You saved me from a life that was not really life at all. You reminded me that I could feel, that I could hope, that I could build instead of just running. Will you marry me?" "Yes." The word came out choked with tears of joy. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then pulled her into a kiss that was tender and fierce and full of promise. Behind them, Thomas cleared his throat, and they broke apart to find him watching them with tears streaming down his face. "I take it I am gaining a son," he said, his voice rough. "If you will have me, sir." Nathan stood, helping Victoria to her feet as well. "I know I am not what you probably imagined for your daughter. I have no family, no property, nothing to offer but myself and my love for her. But I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my life making her happy and keeping her safe." Thomas crossed the room and pulled Nathan into a hard embrace. "You are exactly what I wanted for my daughter. A good man with a good heart who loves her as much as I do. Welcome to the family, son." They were married in March of 1877, in a small ceremony at the church in Ogden with half the town in attendance. Victoria wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved all these years, and Nathan wore a new suit that Thomas had insisted on buying for him. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed her with such reverence that several of the older women in attendance had to dab at their eyes. Thomas had given them a piece of land adjacent to his own property as a wedding gift, and Nathan threw himself into building them a home with the same intensity he brought to everything he cared about. It was not large, but it was well made and solid, with a wide porch and a view of the mountains. Victoria helped where she could, planning the layout, choosing details, imagining their life together in this space they were creating. The first time they made love in their new home, with the smell of fresh wood still in the air and moonlight streaming through the uncurtained windows, Nathan cried. He held Victoria afterward, his face buried in her hair, his shoulders shaking with the force of emotions he had held back for so long. "I never thought I would have this again," he whispered. "A home, a wife, a future. I thought that part of my life was over, that I would spend the rest of my days alone because I was too broken to be fixed. But you fixed me, Victoria. You made me whole." "You were never broken," she murmured, running her fingers through his hair. "You were hurt, and there is a difference. And you did the hardest work yourself, Nathan. You chose to stay, to try, to open your heart even though you were terrified. I just loved you through it. Just loved me through it," he repeated with a shaky laugh, as if that was not everything. Their first year of marriage was a learning process. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, learned how to fight fairly and make up thoroughly, learned to navigate the ordinary challenges of building a life together. Nathan still had moments when the old fear would surface, when he would wake in the middle of the night and have to reassure himself that Victoria was still there, still breathing, still his. But those moments grew less frequent as time passed and his trust in their permanence deepened. Victoria learned that Nathan's love language was action rather than words. He might not say, "I love you," every day, but he showed it constantly in 1,000 small ways. The way he always made sure her coffee was exactly the right temperature in the morning. The way he would leave wildflowers on her pillow when he had to leave early for work. The way he looked at her, even after a year of marriage, like she was the most precious thing in his world. In the spring of 1878, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had waited to be certain before telling Nathan. When she finally did, over breakfast on a sunny April morning, he went completely still. "A baby," he said, his voice strange. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes." Victoria watched him carefully, trying to read his reaction. "Are you happy?" "Happy," Nathan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Happy does not begin to cover it. Terrified, overwhelmed, grateful. But yes, underneath all of that, incredibly happy." He pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. "When?" "October, I think, maybe late September." She leaned into his embrace, feeling the tension in his body. "Talk to me, Nathan. What are you thinking?" "That I do not know how to be a father," he admitted. "That I am scared of doing it wrong, of failing this child the way I feel like I failed my family by not being there when they needed me." "You did not fail your family." Victoria had said this to him 100 times, but she would say it 100 more if that was what it took. "You were not there because you were working to support them. You could not have known what would happen." "I know that logically, but there is a part of me that will always feel like I should have been there, should have been able to save them." Nathan pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "What if I cannot protect this child? What if something happens and I am not there?" "Then we will face it together," Victoria said firmly. "You are not alone anymore, Nathan. You have me and we have each other, and we will figure this out the way we have figured out everything else. One day at a time." He kissed her then, gently, reverently, his hand coming to rest on her still flat stomach. "I am going to try my damnedest to be a good father." "You will be," she said with absolute certainty. "I have no doubt about that." Nathan threw himself into preparing for the baby with the same intensity he had brought to building their house. He built a beautiful cradle from pine, carving delicate designs into the headboard. He repaired and reinforced the fence around their property, as if making it stronger would somehow keep their child safer. He even, to Victoria's amusement, attempted to knit baby clothes, though he gave up after producing a single, slightly lopsided booty. "It is the thought that counts," Victoria said, trying not to laugh at his frustrated expression. "The thought was that our child should have warm feet. This thing would not fit a mouse." Nathan held up the tiny, misshapen booty with disgust. "I will stick to carpentry." Thomas Fenton was over the moon at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. He started work immediately on a project he had been planning for years, building an extension onto the lumber mill that would eventually be Nathan's to run. "For my grandson or granddaughter," he explained when Nathan protested that it was too much. "I want this child to have something solid to inherit, a legacy to build on." Victoria went into labor on a cool October evening, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Nathan, who had been working late at the mill, came home to find Consuela helping Victoria through contractions and immediately went pale. "Is she all right? Is the baby all right? Should I fetch the doctor?" The questions tumbled out in a rush. "Nathan, breathe," Victoria managed between contractions. "Consuela has already sent for the doctor. Everything is fine. This is normal." "Normal," Nathan repeated faintly. "Right, normal." He looked anything but calm, and despite her discomfort, Victoria found his panic endearing. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Nathan stayed by Victoria's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement even though he looked terrified. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, Nathan stared at him with such awe that it brought tears to Victoria's eyes. "A boy," the doctor said, placing the baby in Victoria's arms after cleaning him up. "A healthy boy. Congratulations. We have a son." Nathan's voice was thick with emotion as he carefully touched the baby's tiny hand. "Victoria, we have a son." They named him Thomas Nathan Sterling after Victoria's father and his own, and he was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a cap of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. Nathan held him for hours that first night, just staring at his small face with an expression of such profound love and terror that it broke Victoria's heart and healed it all at once. "I will keep you safe," Nathan whispered to the sleeping baby. "I promise you, I will always keep you safe." Over the next few years, Nathan proved to be an excellent father, though a sometimes overprotective one. He fretted over every cough, every bump and bruise, every perceived danger. Victoria had to remind him frequently that children needed room to explore and make mistakes, that wrapping Thomas in cotton wool would not help him grow into a strong, capable man. "I know," Nathan would say. "I know you are right. But when I look at him, all I can think about is how fragile life is, how quickly it can all be taken away. So instead, think about how precious it is," Victoria would counter. "Think about how lucky we are to have him, to have this life together. Let joy be bigger than fear." It was a lesson Nathan was still learning, probably would be learning for the rest of his life. But he got better at it with time, more able to let go of his anxiety and simply be present in the moment. Victoria watched him slowly, painfully, learn to trust in their permanence, to believe that this life they had built was real and solid and not going to disappear in flames. In 1881, Victoria gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. If Nathan had been protective of Thomas, he was absolutely impossible with Rose. No one was good enough, careful enough, gentle enough with his daughter. Victoria spent the first 6 months of Rose's life preventing Nathan from building a literal tower to lock her in. "She is a baby, not a princess in a fairy tale," Victoria said, exasperated, when she caught him drawing plans for what he called a secure nursery. "I just want her to be safe," Nathan protested, but he abandoned the plans when Victoria threatened to sleep in the barn until he came to his senses. Thomas Fenton passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1883, with Nathan and Victoria by his side. He had lived to see his grandchildren, to watch his business flourish under Nathan's management, to know that his daughter was happy and loved. His last words were to Nathan, "You gave me my daughter back, son. You gave her life again. Thank you for that." Nathan grieved deeply, the loss reopening old wounds about death and impermanence. But this time, he had Victoria and the children to anchor him, to remind him that grief was the price of love and that love was always worth the price. He did not run. He stayed and he felt, and he let himself be comforted. They inherited the lumber mill and the house where Victoria had grown up. Nathan expanded the business, turning it into one of the most successful operations in Utah Territory, later Utah State. He employed fair wages and safe working conditions, and men came from all over to work for him because they knew Nathan Sterling treated his workers like human beings rather than expendable resources. Victoria became involved in the women's suffrage movement, fighting for the vote and for women's rights more broadly. Nathan supported her fully, even when some of the other men in town criticized him for letting his wife be so political. "She is her own person," he would say mildly. "I do not let her do anything. She makes her own choices." Their children grew up strong and loved. Thomas became a quieter, more thoughtful version of his father, interested in books and learning. Rose was a whirlwind of energy and opinions, taking after her mother's determination and her father's intensity. In 1885, Victoria gave birth to twin boys, James and John, named after Nathan's brother and grandfather. Nathan took their arrival as further proof that life could be good and generous, even to those who had known terrible loss. In 1890, On a crisp autumn day very much like the one when they had first met, Nathan and Victoria took a ride out to the hillside where he had first kissed her. The children were with Consuela, giving them a rare afternoon alone. They sat together in the grass, Victoria leaning against Nathan's chest as they watched the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. "You remember what you said to me that day?" Victoria asked. "You said you would fall in love with me if you stayed." "I remember." Nathan's arms tightened around her. "I was already halfway there. I was completely there by the time I asked you to marry me. Are you glad you stayed?" It was a question she asked sometimes, needing the reassurance even after all these years. "Every single day," Nathan said without hesitation. "You saved my life, Victoria, not from a runaway horse but from a runaway heart that would have kept running until it ran out completely. You taught me that it was okay to stop, to feel, to hope. You gave me a family again when I thought I would never have one. You gave me everything that matters." "You saved me too," Victoria said softly. "Maybe not from death, but from a half-life. I was so careful before you, so controlled. I never let myself feel anything too deeply, because I was afraid of being hurt like I was when Mother died. But you made me want to risk it. You made me want to feel everything, the good and the bad, the joy and the pain. You made me want to really live." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the world in shades of gold and rose. Nathan's hand rested on Victoria's stomach, where their fifth child grew, due to arrive in the spring. Life had been generous to them, more generous than Nathan had ever thought possible in those dark years of drifting. "I love you," he said, the words coming easier now than they had in the beginning, though they were no less meaningful. "I will love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that too." "I love you too," Victoria whispered, "always and forever." They rode back to Ogden as the stars began to emerge, back to the home they had built, and the children waiting for them, and the life they had created together through courage and love and sheer stubborn determination. Nathan Sterling had spent 8 years running from his pain, convinced that movement was the only way to outpace grief. But Victoria Fenton had shown him that standing still, putting down roots, opening his heart despite the risk, that was the real courage. She had saved him from a runaway heart, and in doing so had given him a life worth living. Their fifth child, a daughter named Sarah after Nathan's little sister, was born in April of 1891. Nathan held her and cried, finally able to speak his sister's name without it feeling like a knife to the heart. The past would always be part of him, the loss would always be there, but it no longer defined him. He was not the broken boy who had lost everything. He was a man who had found everything again, who had rebuilt what had been destroyed, who had learned that love was always worth the risk. As the years passed, Nathan and Victoria watched their children grow and flourish. Thomas went to university and became a teacher, passionate about education and learning. Rose shocked everyone by becoming one of the first female doctors in the state, fierce and brilliant, and determined to help people. The twins went into business together, expanding the lumber mill into a full construction company. And little Sarah, with her father's eyes and her mother's spirit, became a suffragette and political activist, fighting for justice with the same intensity Nathan had once put into running away from his pain. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1897, Nathan took Victoria back to that same hillside where so much had begun. They were older now, with silver threading through their hair and lines around their eyes, but the love between them burned as bright as ever. "Do you remember what else you said to me here?" Victoria asked, settling into his arms as naturally as breathing. "You said you did not know how to let someone in anymore." "I remember being terrified," Nathan said. I remember thinking you were asking for something I could not possibly give. But you gave it anyway. Victoria turned to look up at him. You opened your heart even though you were scared. That is the bravest thing I have ever witnessed. You made it possible, Nathan said simply. You made me believe it was safe to try. And you know what I have learned in 20 years of marriage. What? That you were right. The only thing more tragic than losing someone you love is never allowing yourself to love at all. Nathan cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing over her cheekbones in a gesture that had become as familiar as breathing. I lost my first family, and it nearly destroyed me. But if I had let that loss define me forever, if I had never opened my heart again, I would have missed out on all of this. Our children, our life together, every single moment of joy and love and connection. And that would have been the real tragedy. I am so proud of you, Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. So proud of the man you have become, the father you are, the husband you have been to me all these years. I am only those things because of you, Nathan said, because you refused to let me run. Because you saw past the walls I had built and loved me anyway. Because you were patient when I was difficult and stubborn when I tried to push you away and faithful when I doubted everything including myself. They stayed on that hillside until the stars came out, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the past they had overcome and the future that stretched before them. Life had not been easy, but it had been good. They had built something real and lasting, a love that had weathered storms and emerged stronger for it. Nathan Sterling had been saved from a runaway horse by his own quick reflexes and decisive action. But he had been saved from a runaway heart by something much more powerful. The patient, steadfast, unwavering love of a woman who had refused to let him disappear into his fear. Victoria had caught him when he fell, just as she had promised, and together they had built a life neither of them could have imagined in those early, uncertain days. As they rode home under the stars, Nathan thought about the boy he had been at 17, devastated by loss and convinced he would never be whole again. He thought about the man he had been at 25, drifting from town to town with no purpose beyond avoiding pain. And he thought about the man he was now, at 45, surrounded by family and love and all the messy, beautiful complications of a life fully lived. If he could go back and tell that broken boy anything, it would be this: hold on, keep breathing, keep moving forward. Because somewhere out there is a woman who will save you from yourself, who will teach you that love is worth the risk, who will show you that happiness is possible even after devastating loss. Hold on, because the best parts of your life have not happened yet. But of course, he could not go back. None of them could. Time only moved in one direction, carrying them forward into whatever came next. All anyone could do was choose how they met that future, with fear and withdrawal, or with hope and open hearts. Nathan had made his choice 20 years ago on a dusty street in Ogden, when he had seen a woman in danger and decided to act rather than walk away. That single decision had changed the entire trajectory of his life, had given him everything he held most dear. It had taught him that running from pain did not heal it, that isolation was not protection, that the only way to truly live was to risk being hurt. Their children married and had children of their own, and Nathan and Victoria's house was often filled with the sound of grandchildren's laughter. Nathan proved to be a softer grandfather than he had been a father, having finally learned to let joy be bigger than fear. He taught the grandchildren to ride and fish, to work with their hands, to be kind and brave and true to themselves. Victoria became known throughout Utah as a formidable advocate for women's rights and social justice. She used the influence that came from being Mrs. Nathan Sterling, wife of one of the most successful businessmen in the state, to push for changes that improved countless lives. Nathan supported her completely, proud of her passion and determination. They grew old together, as so many couples hope to do but so few actually achieve. They faced the ordinary challenges of aging, the aches and pains and limitations, with the same partnership that had carried them through everything else. When Nathan's hands grew too stiff with arthritis to work with wood anymore, Victoria would read to him in the evenings. When Victoria's eyesight began to fail, Nathan would describe the world to her in vivid detail, painting pictures with words. In the spring of 1915, Nathan fell ill with pneumonia. The doctor warned Victoria that at his age, the prognosis was not good, but she refused to accept that this was the end. She stayed by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, telling him stories of their life together, reminding him of all the reasons he had to keep fighting. "I am tired, love," Nathan said one evening when they were alone. His voice was weak but steady. "I have lived a good life, a much better life than I ever dreamed possible. I am not afraid anymore." "You cannot leave me yet," Victoria said fiercely, though tears were streaming down her face. "We have more life to live together, more grandchildren to meet, more sunsets to watch, more everything. I will always be with you." Nathan squeezed her hand with what little strength he had. "Even when I am gone, I will be there, in every sunrise, every flower, every memory we made together." "You saved me, Victoria. You gave me 40 years I never would have had. Let me rest now, knowing I was loved beyond measure." "You were," she whispered, climbing into the bed beside him despite the doctor's protests. "You are, you will always be." But Nathan did not rest that night. The fever broke in the early morning hours, and though his recovery was slow, he regained his strength day by day. Victoria joked that he was too stubborn to die, but they both knew the truth. He was not ready to leave her yet. There was still more life to be lived. They made it to their 40th wedding anniversary in 1917, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The family gathered in the house Nathan had built with his own hands, now expanded and remodeled several times to accommodate their growing family. Nathan looked around at all these people, this vast network of love and connection that had sprung from his decision to stop running and Victoria's refusal to let him go, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "What are you thinking?" Victoria asked, sitting beside him in the place of honor. "That I am the luckiest man who ever lived," Nathan said simply. "That every choice I made that led me to you was the right one. That every hard thing I faced was worth it for this moment, surrounded by everyone I love most in the world." "We are the lucky ones," Thomas said, raising his glass. "Dad, you could have kept running when you met Mom. You could have let fear win. Instead, you stayed and built all of this." He gestured around the room. "This family, this love, this legacy. You taught us that courage is not the absence of fear but the willingness to move forward despite it." "Thank you for that." Nathan could not speak past the lump in his throat, so he simply nodded and pulled Victoria closer. She fit against his side as perfectly as she had that first day, and he thought again about how miraculous it was that they had found each other at all. Two people, both wounded by loss, both scared of being hurt again, who had somehow looked past their fear and chosen to love anyway. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Nathan and Victoria sat together on their porch watching the stars. It was where they had spent countless evenings over the years, talking and laughing and simply being together. "You remember what you said to me the day we met?" Nathan asked. "After I gave you your packages, I asked where you were staying," Victoria said, smiling at the memory. "And you said you were just passing through." "I thought I was," Nathan said. I really believed I would rest for a few days and then keep moving, just like I always did. But then you invited me to dinner, and you looked at me like I mattered, and suddenly I did not want to be passing through anymore. I wanted to stay." "I am so glad you did," Victoria whispered. "I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Neither can I," Nathan said. "And that is the miracle, Victoria. That after all those years of running and hiding and keeping everyone at a distance, I can sit here and say honestly that I cannot imagine my life without another person in it. You did that. You taught me that connection was worth the risk, that love was worth the vulnerability, that staying was worth the fear." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the night deepen around them. Nathan thought about the runaway horse that had nearly killed Victoria all those years ago, about his instinctive lunge to save her, about how that single moment had changed both their lives forever. He had saved her from physical danger, but she had saved him from something far worse. A life lived in fear, a heart that ran from connection, a future empty of love and meaning. In the end, that was what their story came down to. Two people who had saved each other, not from death, but from death in life. Two hearts that had been running in different ways, hers carefully protected behind walls of propriety and control, his actively fleeing from anything that might hurt, who had somehow found each other and decided to stop running and start living instead. Nathan Sterling died peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1920, at the age of 69, with Victoria beside him as she had been for 43 years. His last words, whispered to her in the darkness, were "Thank you for saving me." Victoria held him as he slipped away, her tears falling on his face, her heart breaking even as it swelled with gratitude for every moment they had shared. She missed him terribly in the years that followed, but she was not alone. Their children and grandchildren surrounded her with love, and she found comfort in the life they had built together. When people asked about her husband, she would smile and say, "He was a man who learned to love despite being terrified of loss. He was the bravest person I ever knew." Victoria Fenton Sterling passed away 5 years later, in the spring of 1925, at the age of 71. Her children found her in her garden, a smile on her face, surrounded by the flowers Nathan had planted for her over the years. In her pocket was a worn piece of paper, a note Nathan had written her on their first anniversary. It said simply, "I stayed. Thank you for giving me a reason." They were buried beside each other in the Ogden Cemetery, beneath a stone that read, "Nathan and Victoria Sterling." He saved her from a runaway horse. She saved him from a runaway heart. Together, they built a life of love. Their children and grandchildren tended their graves faithfully, making sure fresh flowers were always present, telling their own children and grandchildren the story of how a chance meeting on a dusty street had blossomed into a love that transformed two broken people into something whole and beautiful. The lumber mill continued to operate under family management for generations, a testament to what Nathan and Victoria had built together. The house Nathan constructed with his own hands still stood a century later, preserved by the family as a reminder of where they came from, and what was possible when two people chose love over fear. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind was just right, people swore they could hear laughter coming from that old house, the sound of two souls who had found each other against all odds and refused to let go, who had saved each other in the ways that mattered most, who had proved that love, real love, was always worth the risk.